Chapter 42, The Rest of the Thread. The thread master was sitting atop of his spool of thread, swinging his tail back and forth and eating a piece of celery. "Well, look here," he said when he saw Despereaux. "Would you just look at that? It's the mouse who loved a human princess. Back from the dungeon in one piece. The old thread master would say that I didn't do my job well, that because you are still alive, I must have tied the thread incorrectly. But it is not so. And how do I know it's not so? Because the thread is still around your neck." He nodded and took a bite of his celery. "I need the rest of it," said Despereaux. "The rest of what? Your neck?" "The rest of the thread." "Well, I can't just hand it over to any old mouse," said the thread master. "They say red thread is special, sacred, though I, myself, after spending so much time with it, know it for what it is." "What is it?" said Despereaux. "Thread," said the thread master. He shrugged and took another loud bite of celery. "Nothing more, nothing less. But I pretend, friend, I pretend." "And what, may I ask, do you intend to do with the thread?" "Save the princess." "Ah, yes, the princess, the beautiful princess. That's how this whole story started, isn't it? I have to save her. There is no one but me to do it. It seems to be that way with most things. No one to do the really disagreeable jobs except oneself. And how exactly will you use a spool of thread to save a princess? A rat has taken her and hidden her in a dungeon, so I have to go back to the dungeon, and it's full of twists and turns and hidden chambers." "Like a maze?" said the thread master. "Yes, like a maze. And I have to find my way to her wherever she is hidden, and then I have to lead her back out again. The only way to do that is with the thread." Gregory, the jailer, tied a rope around his ankle so that he would not get lost. As the mouse said this, he shuddered, thinking of Gregory and his broken rope, dying lost in the darkness. "I," said Despereaux, "I will use thread." The thread master nodded. I see, he said. He took a meditative bite of celery. "You, friend, are on a quest." "I don't know what this is. I don't know what that is," said Despereaux. "You don't have to know. You just have to feel compelled to do the thing, the impossible, important task at hand." "Impossible?" said Despereaux. "Impossible," said the thread master. "Important." He sat chewing his celery and staring somewhere past Despereaux, and then suddenly he leapt off his spool. "Who am I to stand in the way of a quest?" he said. "Roll her away." "I can have it?" "Yes, for the quest." Despereaux put his front paw up and touched the spool. He gave it a experimental push forward. "Thank you," he said, looking into the eye of the thread master. "I don't know your name." "Hubbis." "Thank you, Hubbis." "There's something else, something that belongs with the thread." Hubbis went into a corner and came back with a needle. "You can use it for protection." "Like a sword?" said Despereaux. "Like a knight would have." "Yes," said Hubbis. He gnawed off a length of thread and used it to tie the needle around Despereaux's waist. "Like so." "Thank you, Hubbis," said Despereaux. He put his right shoulder against the spool of thread and pushed it forward again. "Wait," said Hubbis. He stood up on his hind legs, put his paws on Despereaux's shoulder, and leaned in close to him. Despereaux smelled the sharp, clean scent of celery as the thread master bent his head, took hold of the thread around Despereaux's neck in his sharp teeth and pulled on it. "There," said Hubbis, when the piece of thread broke and dropped to the ground. "Now you're free. You see, you're not going into the dungeon because you have to. You're going because you choose to." "Yes," said Despereaux, "because I'm on a quest." The word felt good and right in his mouth. Quest. Say it, reader. Say the word quest out loud. It is an extraordinary word, isn't it? So small, yet so full of wonder, so full of hope. Goodbye, said Hovis to Despereaux. Despereaux pushed the spool of thread out of the threadmaster's hole. I have never known a mouse who had made it out of the dungeon only to go back into it again. Goodbye, friend. Goodbye, mouse amongst mice.
Hi everyone, I'm Christy Moore. I'm secretary of the PTO board, and today we are going to be reading Despereaux, chapter 43, What Cook Was Stirring. That night, Despereaux rolled the thread from the threadmaster's lair along innumerable hallways down 3 flights of stairs. Reader, allow me to put this in perspective for you. The average house mouse, or castle mouse if you will, weighs somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 ounces. Despereaux, as you well know, is in no way average. In fact, he was so incredibly small that he weighed about half of what the average mouse weighs, 2 ounces. That is all. Think about it. He was nothing but 2 ounces of mouse pushing a spool of thread that weighed almost as much as he did. Honestly, reader, what do you think the chances are of a small mouse succeeding in his quest? Zip, zero, nada, goose eggs. But you must, when you are calculating the odds of the mouse's success, factor in his love for the princess. Love, as we already have discussed, is a powerful, wonderful, ridiculous thing capable of moving mountains and spools of thread. Even with the love and purpose in his heart, Despereaux was very, very tired when he reached the door to the castle kitchen at midnight. His paws were shaking and his muscles were jumping, and the place where his tail should be was throbbing. But he still had a very, very long way to go into the kitchen and down the many stairs of the dungeon, and then through, somehow, some way, through the rat-filled darkness of the dungeon itself, not knowing where he was going. And oh, reader, when he stopped to consider what lay ahead of him, Despereaux was filled with an icky feeling of despair. He leaned his head against the spool of thread, and he smelled celery there. And he thought of Hovis, and how Hovis seemed to believe in him and his quest. So the mouse raised his head, squared his shoulders, and pushed the spool of thread forward again, into the kitchen, where he saw, too late, that there was a light burning. Despereaux froze. Cook was in the kitchen. She was bent over the stove. She was stirring something. Was it sauce? No. Was it stew? No. What Cook was stirring was soup. Soup, reader, in the king's own castle, against the king's law, right under the king's very nose, Cook was making soup. As the mouse looked on, Cook put her face into the steam rising from the pot and took a deep breath. She smiled a beatific smile, and the steam rose around her and caught the light of the candle and made a halo over her head. Despereaux knew how Cook felt about mice in her kitchen. He remembered quite clearly her instructions to Midge regarding himself. Kill him. The only good mouse is a dead mouse. But he had to go through Cook's kitchen to get to the dungeon door, and he had no time to waste. Soon daylight would dawn, and the whole castle would be awake, and a mouse would have no chance at all of pushing a spool of thread across the floor without attracting a great deal of attention. He would have to sneak past the mouse-hating Cook now. And so, screwing his courage into the sticking place, Despereaux leaned against the spool of thread and set it rolling across the floor. Cook turned from the stove, a dripping spoon in her hand and a frightened look on her face, and shouted, "Who is there?" All right, everyone, thank you so much for reading with me today. I'm really excited to see what happens now. We're almost done with the book.
Hello, my name is Zariah Beeman, and I'm a student at Guam High. Today I'll be reading chapter 44, titled, Whose Ears Are Those? Who's there? Shouted Cook again. Despereaux wisely said nothing. The kitchen was silent. Said Cook. Nothing. It's nothing at all. Just my nerves. Just my nervous Ellie ears playing tricks on me. You're an old fool, she said to herself as she turned back to the stove. You're just an old fool afraid of being caught making soup. Despereaux slumped against the spool of thread, and as he leaned there, his heart pounding, His paws shaking, a small wonderful something occurred. A midnight breeze entered the kitchen and danced over to the stove and picked up the scent of the soup and then swirled across the floor and delivered the smell right directly to the mouse's nose. Despereaux put his head up in the air. He sniffed some more. He had never in his life smelled anything so lovely, so inspiring. With each sniff he took, he felt himself growing stronger, braver. Cook leaned in close to the kettle and put the spoon in and took the spoon out and blew upon the spoon and then brought it to her lips and sipped and swallowed. She said. Huh. She took another sip. Missing something, she said. Maybe salt, more salt maybe. She put the spoon down and took up an enormous salt shaker and sprinkled salt into the kettle. And Despereaux, feeling emboldened by the smell of soup, again set to the work pushing the spool of thread. Quickly, he said to himself, rolling the spool across the floor. Do it quickly. Do you not think? Just push. Cook swirled the salt shaker in her hand and shouted, Who goes there? Despereaux stopped pushing. He hid behind the spool of thread as Cook took the candle from the stove and held it up high. She said. The candlelight came closer, closer. What's this? The light came to rest directly on Despereaux's big ears, sticking up from behind the spool of thread. Ho, said Cook. Whose ears are those? And the light from the candle then shone full in Despereaux's face. A mouse, said Cook. A mouse in my kitchen. Despereaux closed his eyes. He prepared for his death. He waited, reader, and waited. And then he heard the sound of laughter. He opened his eyes and looked at Cook. Ho, said Cook. Ho he. From the first time in my life I am glad to see a mouse in my kitchen. Why, she asked. Why am I glad? Ho he, because a mouse is not a king's man here to punish me for making soup. That is why. Because a mouse is not a king's man here to take me to the dungeon for owning a spoon. Ho he, a mouse. I, Cook, am glad to see a mouse. Cook's face was red and her stomach was shaking. Ho he, she said, and not just any mouse, a mouse with a needle tied around his waist, a mouse with no tail. Ain't it lovely? Ho he. She shook her head and wiped at her eyes. Look, mouse, these are extraordinary times, and because of that we must have some peace between us. I will not ask what you are doing in my kitchen, and you, in return, will tell no one what I am cooking. She turned then and went back to the stove and set down the candle and picked up the spoon and again put it in the pot of soup and took it back out and tasted the soup, smacking her lips together. Not right, she said. Not quite right. Missing something. Still. Despereaux did not move. He could not move. He was paralyzed by fear. He sat on the kitchen floor. One small tear fell out of his left eye. He had expected Cook to kill him. Instead, reader, she had laughed at him, and he was surprised how much her laughter hurt. That is the end of my chapter. Thank you for reading with me, and I hope you guys enjoy the next one.
Chapter 45. Some Soup. Cook stirred the soup and then put the spoon down and held up the candle and looked over at Despereaux. What are you waiting for? She said. Go, go, go. There will never be another opportunity for a mouse to escape from my kitchen unharmed. The smell of soup again wafted in Despereaux's direction. He put his nose up in the air. His whiskers trembled. Yes, said Cook. That is soup that you are smelling. The princess, not that you would know or care, is missing. Bless her good-hearted self. And times are terrible. When times are terrible, soup is the answer. Don't it smell like the answer? Yes, said Despereaux. He nodded. Cook turned away from him. She put the candle down and picked up her spoon and started to stir. Oh, she said. These are dark days. And she shook her head. I'm kidding myself. There ain't no point in making soup. Useless others eat it. Unless others eat it. Soup needs another mouth to taste it, another heart to be warmed by it. She stopped stirring. She turned and looked at Despereaux. Mouse, said Cook, would you like some soup? And then, without waiting for an answer, she took a saucer and spooned some soup into it and set it on the kitchen floor. Come closer, she said. I don't aim to hurt you, I promise. Despereaux sniffed. The soup smelled wonderful, incredible. Keeping one eye on Cook, he stepped out from behind the spool of thread and crept closer. Go on, said Cook. Taste it. Despereaux stepped into the saucer. Soup covered his paws. He bent his head to the hot broth. He sipped. Oh, it was lovely. Garlic and chicken and watercress, the same soup that Cook had made the day the Queen died.